We're live here at the station of decapitation without your head. I'm Nasty Neal.
I'm Treacherous, Trista.
And we're joined by Bill Oberst Jr., the return of Bill Oberst Jr., and director Mark Savage of Painkiller, which is out now on demand, DVD, digital, all the various places. It's very cool to have you both here. So first of all, I know it's co-written. So where did the idea of Painkiller come from? Who had the idea?
The inspiration for the going with the opioid theme was there's a guy who's I have a partnership with the company Delirium, and we've made a number of movies. And his name's Tom Parnell, and Tom lost a 21-year-old son to an opioid overdose a couple of years ago. And of course, devastating to him. Like, really the worst thing that could happen is like losing your child. I mean, in the natural course of things is that, you know, you as a parent will always, of course, die before your child. So when it flips around, it's obviously something you don't ever get over. So Tom, still in the midst of his grief, had a conversation with me where we're deciding what we wanted to do next after Purgatory Road. We've written a number of scripts. We wanted to do something a little lower budget, and that's what we came up with. And initially he's a little hesitant to do it because the wounds from the loss were still smarting. And he saw it as something that would help him actually deal with his grief, you know, to do something for his son. The film is dedicated to his son. So the way we went about it, the writing was, I did an outline, sort of outlined the structure. Then Tom wrote the first draft, then came back to me. I did a draft, then back to Tom. We went back and forth for a while until we had about 15 or 16 drafts. And then we also got together a number of times. He's in Florida, I'm in California, and we worked on it together. But yeah, the idea of doing it on that focus really was inspired by Tom.
Is that something hard to do when you're making a movie about real themes and, you know, important questions and topics? So you want that in the movie, but you also want to balance that with you're also making a movie that people can enjoy, whether that is something, you know, they're there to learn about or not. That's
a great point. One of the paramount things in my mind is that we still wanted to essentially make a thriller. So, you know, we didn't want it to be like, you know, for example, opioid polemic first, then thriller. We still wanted it to be, you know, a solid thriller. And it's also a sequel, sort of unofficial sequel to another film that we'd done a couple of years earlier called Stress to Kill, where Bill played a character in that who's sort of pissed off with the world at large, like just people's rudeness, you know, things like people talking on cell phones in movies, you know, things that actually almost justify murder, or at least getting someone blowing a dart into your neck. And so Bill's character had already expressed himself through the art of murder, we could say. And so it then made sense when we're debating how are we going to tell this story through what particular frame. Then it became, well, why don't we take the character or a character or two from Stress to Kill, because Bill had a daughter in that. And nearly all the other females in the film didn't fare well, but Bill survived and his daughter survived. And we figured, well, why don't we then play on that in between that film getting made and getting released, and now in that interim period, say 4 years or so, that's when Bill lost his own daughter. So Bill, in the sense, is almost like the proxy for Tom, who had lost his son. So Bill became that character. And then the one other character that we brought forward for this film, as you see in the movie, is Tom Parnell, who also plays the good doctor in the movie, who Bill kind of like, you know, sort of like teams up with, at least closer to the end of the movie. So yeah, I mean, we have to be very mindful of that. It's really important that we want to get the information about the opioids, want to convey the opioid epidemic, and that's why we chose to do it through a radio talk show, which was, for me, was kind of partially influenced by some films I love that are about the radio, because I actually love the whole idea of talk radio. One was the movie Talk Radio, the Oliver Stone film.
I think it's a really underrated movie, yeah.
Yeah, I love that film. And also, it's also done to some extent in George Romero's Martin,
Mhm.
That's more the vampire calling up the radio station, which is also used to some extent. Trista would know that well in Purgatory Road, because she's also making phone calls to someone in a radio station. So it kind of like gives an interesting outlet to get a character's feelings rather than them, say, talking to someone else. They're actually talking to a broader audience out there. So it was a bit of a juggling act to go between, okay, it's a thriller story, but at the same time, we want to convey information about the opioids. So it was a bit of a balancing act.
Yeah. So how early on was Bill involved then? It had to be pretty early if you're going to use a character from a previous movie.
Well, my feeling is Bill is always early
Okay.
involved in my life. I love Bill. I love having Bill in my films. So yeah, for this one, I believe, like, I'm not sure, I mean, Bill may be able to recall this. I'm not sure whether I told Bill I'm writing it and, we're writing it and we're going to call you about it. I'm not sure the conversation, but it was always, it just seemed like there should not be anyone else for this role other than Bill. I certainly didn't want another person playing Bill Johnson. I mean, if anyone has seen Bill on screen, I know plenty have, that, Bill embodies a character, like nobody else, except maybe Trista, actually. So I would say that it was always like, I just can't imagine it without Bill.
So Bill, when Mark came to you, what did you think of did he tell you the idea first? Did he give you the script? How did that work?
No, first he just said he's writing a sequel to Painkiller. And if Mark's involved, Mark is, he's one of my few directorial deities. If he's involved, I want to be involved. He's a dark artist, and I can't say enough about his visual aesthetic. Mark sees the world for what it really is. And I don't mean that in a cynical way. I mean that he sees the pain, he sees the sweat, he sees what we between us call the freakery of all the monstrosity of all human beings. But that doesn't mean that the world is ugly. The world is, I think, and I'm putting words in Mark's mouth, but the reason I love Mark and his work is, to him, the world would be ugly if you pretended that the monstrosity did not exist. That's a hideous world because it's a false world. So if Mark was involved, I wanted to be involved. Then he came back later on with the script and I read it. And actually my first thought was, I'm not their guy. I felt completely inadequate to do this because I slept in Tom's son's bedroom while he was away at college, or we were shooting Stress to Kill. I met him, I knew Tom, and he's like, this is Tom's personal pain. And I felt wholly inadequate to do the role. I felt wholly inadequate the entire time we shot. And I still have no idea that I did anything that was worthy of what should be done to honor Tom's loss and Mark's vision. Mark says he liked it, and that's okay for me. But that's the other thing I like about Mark is I don't have to pretend with him to have some kind of false confidence in my work, which I don't, because with Mark, I really, really want to bring his vision to life, and I always feel inadequate to do it.
Along those lines, and this, I don't know, maybe a hard question for you to answer, but did you talk with Tom about his feelings, to play this character of losing a son?
Yeah, he was right there on set. Mark talked a lot more than I did. Tom is an attorney by trade, and he is reticent and taciturn when he wants to be. So when he does open up even a little bit, it's very powerful. Don't you think so, Mark?
Yeah. There's times when Tom's kind of gone through a lot of different phases. Even while he's making it, there was a couple of scenes that he just didn't even really want to be there. Scenes, because most of the time he was there because, being the co-writer of the film and executive producer, some of the times though, he literally stepped away because, he was uncomfortable with some of the material. It was too painful for him. But you're right, as Bill says, like sometimes he's very open about it and other times he doesn't want to talk about it. So you just got to like pick that moment to get in there. But I felt that, Bill engaged really well with that character. Bill also had some really interesting contributions as well. One thing I've said in several interviews that Bill's always got really, really great questions that enhance the movie. Like I can give you an example. One point he said, wouldn't he blame himself somewhat for what's happened? You know, because parents tend to do that, even if there's no direct reason why they may have been at fault. And so we explored that in some of the dialogue when he met the female cop played by Calamar Gaston in the movie, where he says, why couldn't I have been, why couldn't I have been there? I could have been a better parent. Why didn't I feel her, why didn't I see her pain? I mean, Bill could remember that even better than me. But that came from Bill's question, about like, would he blame himself? And that's something, again, I also really enjoy about working with Bill. He has very, very good ideas, explores it both intellectually and also sort of from a almost like explores the soul of the movie as well, like looks into it and sees its soul and then wants to know some answers to questions that are relevant to that. And that, I think, really enhances the characters.
Blame itself is a big part of the movie. People blaming the addict, people blaming the doctors, people, who is to blame, and is it probably the real answer is a little bit, of all these things. Yeah,
you're right, because it's even, there's even a couple of points when you have a couple of callers calling in saying to him, well, aren't these people losers? Mm-hmm. Can't they just read the instructions on the bottle? And that's definitely something that people often, that's another point of view that some people have. And the answer to that is to a large extent that because of a lot of the, what's called the off-target marketing of the drugs, where they're, for example, giving a drug meant for, say, someone coming out of cancer, they're giving it to someone who's got like, a back pain. The effect on that person is like, it's 10 times more than what they really need, which gives them a sense of euphoria that they've never, ever had before, which then, of course, begins to cause some kind of addiction, because especially if they've had chronic pain, when you're living with chronic pain, there's nothing worse. And a lot of people with chronic pain would almost rather be dead. So when they're given something like an opioid like that, and it's like, it gives such a explosion of euphoria, the addiction is really quick. And the drugs are designed that way, and which is in a way one of the most, pernicious things about the entire industry. I mean, they're fully aware of what these drugs do. And just because you take the pills in accordance with the instructions, it doesn't in any way guarantee you're not going to become addicted.
Mm-hmm. There's really good dialogue on Michael Pare when he says about like, well, what do you do? What do you do for someone who is in chronic pain? If you can't give him an opioid, what do you do for him? It's not answered, but
Yeah, and Bill says, well, I wouldn't give him a gummy bear laced with fentanyl, I believe is the answer there. And that's because there really are gummy bears laced with fentanyl. That's not even like a creation of ours. There are gummy bears laced with fentanyl. So the industry is also set out to make some of the opioids, very, very attractive, almost in almost along the lines of candy, which is pretty, sickening, really.
Mm-hmm. Trista, do you have a question?
I do. I have a bit of an aesthetic question, so I'm going to segue a bit, but I don't want you to think I don't appreciate the profundity of the film. I have a younger brother who passed from addiction, and I know most people have a loved one who has suffered or is suffering, unfortunately. But my question is about the design and the concept of the mask. Can you talk about who developed that?
Yeah. In a way, the chicken came before the egg with that, because what happened is that I was working with an artist friend from England who has done a couple of posters of mine. He did the Purgatory Road poster, the one with the kind of crooked truck and the priest beside. And he's done a few other things too. And I was talking about a Painkiller poster. And I said to him, it would be really good to have, why don't we do something? It was first like the idea of, let's do something like the American flag against a street. And then he gave me that, and I looked at it, and then I thought, something would be better to, I think, maybe have a face. And then I thought, maybe paint the flag on the face. And that then became, could you possibly just do a face that's almost like that you've completely imprinted the American flag onto someone's face, as if you've tattooed their whole face? And he said, let me give that a shot. And so he then designed that and illustrated that, which I really liked. And then I was in Florida at the same time. So I then took that to this guy, Carl Huber, who was also the armorer on the movie and created the mask. And I said, here's the artwork. Can you do a mask that's just like this? And anyway, he happened to have at that time, like one of those blank masks, the one that's kind of got nothing on it yet. It was kind of like sitting in his room. And it was like literally just, waiting to be like, in a way, like filled. So the blank mask was there. And I said, see that mask there? Can you just basically put this mask in the artwork onto that? And so he pretty much found a way to be able to paint in the mask. And I said, I like it cracked because, being representative of a certain aspect of the US, I say, can you kind of crack it and put holes in it and stuff? So it's as if like, it's an American flag, but it's an American flag that's kind of, it's diseased. It's got some serious illness within the mask. So that's pretty much how that came to be. So there's only one mask. We only did one. So the only thing that did worry me a little bit during the movie, and I think I even had a conversation with Bill just about how we only have one and we have to be careful, not to rip it, not to have it like, come like, falling off and coming apart. But I mean, Bill may be able to tell you what it was like to actually wear that mask and how careful he had to be with it.
Yeah, I'm always careful of props because in Abraham Lincoln versus Zombies, the prop master made 3 of those cool sides that he whips open. Number one, well, in my defense, they weren't made really to bear the weight of what they wanted me to do, which was that cool up on the hill shot. Number one, there goes the side. Next day, number 2. And she was like, we only have one. So we reinforced it with a screw. So yes, I'm used to breaking props and I was very careful with the mask. It is strange to act inside a mask. I don't know if Tristan's ever done this, but yeah, it really forces you to think about the character because you don't have your face. In this case, I knew my voice would be distorted. So all you really have is the body movements to carry as a through line with the character.
Interesting. Well, what did you think when you first put on the mask? And does that affect how, well, obviously you said acting in a mask, but just seeing it on you, how does that affect you?
Well,
how you're going to play the character?
Neal, when you're lit in a good key light and you're wearing this really cool jacket and these really cool black boots and you have a 6-shooter in your hand and you have that mask on, you feel pretty badass. It's hard not to. So that's my answer is inexplicably, and I know it sounds kind of dumbed down, but badass.
Mark, where's the mask now?
It's in Tampa. And Tom's got a little storage facility that it's there and it's over a foam head to keep its shape. And at one point we were even thinking of, because I've actually already had some requests recently of kind of like making it like one of those old style Don Post masks, and actually like selling it. So I'm kind of thinking about it. I reckon I've had about 20 people asking about it, like whether they can buy that mask. At the moment, no, but mightn't be such a bad idea. I don't know. I know very little about manufacturing and marketing masks.
Mm-hmm.
I really love the idea of a bunch of little vigilantes at Halloween with little plastic 6-shooters and the mask on.
Uh-huh.
I like that.
It could even be the sequel. I don't know.
I'll tell you something interesting with the mask is that Bill, did his dialogue inside the mask, and he also did dialogue outside the mask as well, which we also got as almost like a clean audio. But we ended up using the audio inside the mask because it was interesting. The audio inside the mask, because we had a microphone that was like almost underneath his chin. So it has interesting dynamic from a, from the audio point of view, the acoustic point of view, it sort of has a very guttural sound when it's in the mask. So that's why in the movie, it does have a weird guttural kind of like sort of sound, like, and it really worked. I remember the sound guy said to me while we're doing the sound mix, he said, okay, so this is what I've done to clean up the inside of the mask. What do you think? He goes, it sounds like a little weird, but then he said to me, I know you kind of like weird, so you might appreciate it, you might not, but I did. I thought that, I said, no, that's the sound. I'd rather use that than use the clean track and just distort it, because the distortion that it had on screen, which we finally used, just seemed like something kind of unique.
Mm-hmm. Now, I know you mentioned like talk radio and some movies that had the radio on it, but did you listen to any like current podcasts or radio shows to get kind of an idea of what these kind of people would be like?
No, not really. I think the only one that, I listen to talk radio a lot anyway, because I like it. I like all kinds of talk radio shows. I just find it a really fascinating format, and just the whole idea. I don't think it's interesting. It's outlasted everything. It survived cable, it survived theaters, it survived television, because there's nothing like it, because it has an immediacy to it. And I mean, so does this, of course. It has an immediacy to it, and there's just something amazing about it. No, because I just wanted it kind of based on a combination, I think, of, say, there's a guy who also used to be on LA radio quite a bit, named Tom Likas, who I used to like his show quite a bit too. And I liked his delivery a lot. So the opening is very similar to some of the Likas delivery in terms of the way we wrote that. But I just think that I like the passion that Bill put into it. And I thought that what Bill did with it was just so great, because he made it very personal. Like, he made us feel like the war that he's fighting is a war that, in fact, that sort of impacts us all. Thought he did a really great job of that. And that's obviously the sort of people who I like. I mean, I also really love Stern. I listen to Stern a lot. I think Stern's fantastic. There used to be a guy, Michael Savage, as well. He was like this kind of like fairly like right-wing sort of conspiracy kind of guy, but I also like his delivery. I think that delivery was also really interesting. That and also the character in also there was also an Australian radio guy from years ago named Darren Hinch, who probably no one in the US would even know him. But Darren Hinch also, he used to take a lot of issues and put them on the radio, even to the point that sometimes he'd get arrested. Like, for example, he'd mention someone whose court case was suddenly, was currently in the courts. And in Australia, there's very strict laws. It's very different to the US. If someone's before the courts, you sort of can't get on the radio and say like, oh, this guy's as guilty as hell. You can't really do that in Australia. And he used to do stuff like that. And he'd get arrested. And sometimes he'd go to jail for like 3 or 4 days. And as a result, would also then give the case more credibility, or his issue more credibility. So I felt in a way that there was a little bit of that in the way that we wrote it. But I think, as always, Bill just brings his own understanding and conceptualization of the characters, to the movie. And I think that that's, something that's so strong about what Bill does. And I also say, since she's here too, because I mean, I totally believe it. Same with Trista, just bringing, just totally inhabiting the character, the pulse of the character. You can smell the blood of the character, the breath of the character, everything, with these two actors. Like, they're just, two extraordinary actors who I'm very humbled and proud to have worked with.
How about you, Bill? Was there anyone you listened to try to get into the role?
Yes, very early Larry King on the radio. He wasn't a caricature yet. He wasn't as growly, and he had an extremely natural cadence where you really felt in the very early days that you were listening to him across the dinner table. So that's what at first, and I was completely wrong. My first instincts are always wrong. I thought, oh, he's like a bombastic Rush Limbaugh type, but he wasn't that at all. what Mark just described. You really, he's just talking to you as if you're sitting with him in his grief. And that's what it felt like to me. The whole movie felt like sitting with someone in their grief, and they're just going to say what they're going to say, and there's not a damn thing you can do but listen. That's what it felt like to me. But yeah, early radio Larry King was sort of my delivery model.
Interesting. Trista, do you have another question?
I sure do. This is a bit of a spoiler, but Mark has a cameo in the film, which was super fun for me to watch. So I'd like to know how that came about.
Oh, super fun in a sadistic way, because you figure, oh, there goes Mark onto his back into the water. Yeah, I ended up doing that simply because I really couldn't convey, I felt at the time, I couldn't convey to anyone else exactly how I wanted that done. So I didn't really want to put anyone else through that. So that's why I figured that, yeah, I'm going to do that particular stunt myself, falling in on my back into the water wearing a suit.
You'd mentioned one of the, I believe it was Michael Savage, was like a right-wing
Yeah.
guy. But I liked about the movie is the politics of the movie is pretty ambiguous.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I think that was good because it does. Otherwise, you're going to split the audience, especially today.
Oh,
And
yeah.
you're already
Well,
asking
yeah.
other questions, so
No,
I think that would
we-
muddle it.
We definitely talked about that because essentially the opioid issue is something that just affects everybody. And I think people on both sides of the, the left and right, I don't think anyone is happy with the way that the opioid industry has kind of, exploited and manipulated to basically make profits at the cost of people's lives. And I'd say also the fact that it's gone on for so long is that both parties have made legislation and have not really for a long time didn't do anything about this happening. So it wasn't a left, it wasn't a right issue. It was really just an issue of politicians overall. Until a lot of people started dying and it started getting more attention, there just wasn't a lot done. Even there was just a documentary on HBO, an Alex Gibney documentary on this very issue as well, that was just came out last weekend. Yeah, I mean, they talk about how often, there was actual lobbyists who would lobby certain people, in the Senate to just simply make it easier to access drugs in areas where people were actually cracking down on them. Like, oh, they're cracking down on it, so let's make it even easier to get. And that was something that was a problem. Yeah, it wasn't left, and it wasn't left or right, one or the other. It was both. Mm-hmm. Everybody kind of let it happen until the numbers got so high, until you're starting to get into hundreds of thousands of people dead. That's when something started to be done about it.
And to me, a lot of things like that shouldn't even be politicized. Everyone should, want certain things that should be universal that everyone would want.
Totally agree.
Trista's back here. Trista, welcome back. Did you have another question?
Hi, sorry I missed that. Were you just dying to jump into a body of water? Is that what the answer?
Yeah.
You were
no, it was more just, it was more that we were kind of a little bit time crunched on that day. The sun was going down, and I had almost said earlier on, well, I'm not sure who's going to do that, but it got to that point when there was simply a certain way I wanted to have someone fall into the water. And we didn't have a specific stunt person there to do it. And this character, which is played by me, was someone who hadn't been seen in any other scene. And that's why I just kind of thought, oh, what the hell, I'll do it. Because also I figured that, the water was cold, pretty uncomfortable. I thought that, I'm going to do it. So then I'd rather do it. I have to do it a few times. That's fine. Rather than put some other poor soul through it when the day was nearly over, the shoot was nearly over, and I think we'd almost pretty much done our 10, 11 hour day already.
Bill, had you worked with Michael Pare before?
No, I haven't worked with Pare before. He has the aura of a old-fashioned Hollywood action star to me. He really he knows fights, he knows squibs, and he certainly could have ripped me apart. many times and put me back together in interesting ways had he chosen to. He's a really tough guy physically and an intense presence in a scene. I completely enjoyed the scene where we got to duel back and forth verbally. But yeah, I loved working with Michael.
Mm-hmm. How did he get involved, Mark?
I'd met him a couple of years earlier on the set of another film, and we exchanged numbers. And I said I was a fan of his, and we stayed in touch for like we were in touch for a couple of years. And every now and then, he'd say, "Oh, what are you working on at the moment?" And it finally, came up that was working on this, and I thought, well, he'd be ideal for this because he's very good at kind of moving between kind of like being sort of like fairly nasty, then back to being charming again. And so there's an early scene in the film where you see him as three different people. He's like the very charming doctor. Then there's a young woman comes into the office and he exchanges some sexual favors for some drugs. Then his girlfriend comes in. Then he switches back to like romantic kind of like Don Juan sort of role. I think that's what he does really well. Like he's very good at being able to move through those different variations of those different shades from kind of like, white to black to gray. Does it kind of effortlessly and, sort of can make it look sort of like easy. But yeah, I mean, that kind of character, I think, needed a certain charm to him because he is a doctor, and most doctors, anyway, anyone that are successful are able to be quite charming. But at the same time, also, you also need someone who is, I kind of wanted people to also see that he's not just an out and out kind of like demon. He's not just a demonic doctor, that he's also got some real world issues as well. He's got some real world issues going on with his fiance, and he's also got real world issues going on with people coming in, asking him for some drugs, real world issues going on with his partners who want him to, get a signature on a patent. And he's also got some real serious real world issues going on with his father, which is kind of like a pretty major part of this, that in a way he's in a sense emotionally handicapped by his father. And it's almost like it's so dominant in his life that it's almost paralyzed him. And I figured, yeah, Michael can play that. And according to Michael, anyway, what he said to me, he said that was one of the things that he really liked about it, that he's kind of like, he's playing many shades of one person. That seemed to be what appealed to him.
Interesting. And I know you and Bill worked a lot together. So when did that start? And when did you, realize that this is, there was chemistry there and this was a guy you like to work with? Oh,
do you want to answer that first, Bill?
I'm unmuting because the dog was barking. Thank you, dog. It's quiet now. We met at Dark Delicacies bookshop in Burbank. And for the moment I met Mark, I knew that he was weird and I liked it. And then I sat with him, I think in the Bourgeois Pig, or maybe the restaurant next door near my place in Hollywood. And we watched on a laptop. He showed me some clips from some of his films, and I watched the ones that I could, and I was further drawn in. And then he had me over to his place and blew my mind by showing me some great Japanese revenge films that I was completely unaware of. A film called Angst, a German film, all this stuff that really resonated. Like, I do a lot of conventional stuff and I'm happy to have the work. But what Mark was showing me and offered me the promise of was doing something that was fierce, dark, and artistic, like really using cinema as an art form. And so that's why I just glommed onto him and gravitated to him. And I've told Mark this before, I'll say it now, I would be really happy for the rest of my career, whatever it is, to just make movies with Mark Savage. I swear to God.
Oh, thanks, Bill. That's too kind. Well, I kind of feel the same way, because Bill and I also formed a friendship based on also our love of circuses and freaks. Like, of course, Todd Browning's Freaks, The Unholy Three, The Unknown, films like that. And also just like I also think I also brought along a book and showed Bill some artwork from some, I think I got a very rare Japanese picture book of really interesting old Japanese circus art. I think I brought along some of that and showed that to him. And then I then also wrote a script very much inspired sort of like by that, which Bill and I are going to do eventually, called Circus of Dread. And I could even say right now that it's getting very, very close to that happening, because I've had very good news even in the last month. It's getting closer and closer. So it's that I just think, it's good to collaborate with people you really kind of like see eye to eye on. I mean, I could also say too, that even same with Trista, I kind of felt a very similar kind of connection.
And she's also weird. Yeah.
Talk to her. Yeah, that's sort of, I guess that's that love of the weird was kind of like what we all kind of had in common. But I think that's a thing that when you're making movies, that you look at a film like Ed Wood, which is one of my favorite movies of all time. One of the things I love most about that movie is about it celebrates the idea of working with working with your kind of weird outsider friends. You know, like, to me, there's just nothing better than that. And because when you are an outsider all your life, you often do feel a little bit lonely and alienated. So that when you do meet people who share this, and you're especially brought together by art, the creation of, you know, a film or a play, or I guess even music, but in our case, it's film. You know, there's just something so kind of embracing about that, to be working with people who you don't have to explain yourself, because usually you're used to being around people who kind of go, like with me growing up, I was always a show and tell guy at school, but I was also the guy too, kind of like, oh my God, what else have you got? Or kind of like, oh my God, you know, I was always feeling, oh, you're that weird guy. And it also, to some extent, sometimes almost becomes like a little bit of a diminishment of what you do. You know, like it's kind of like, oh yeah, you're that guy who does that. But when you're around weird people, the guy that does that is like, suddenly you're around people who at least value what you do, in the same way that just because we want to make stuff with weirdness doesn't mean in a way it's any less legit than someone who wants to make, you know, a Disney movie, you know, in the sense that, to me, it's all important. You know, there's nothing, to me, there's no bad subject matter in the sense, like, which I also don't really subscribe to the idea of high art and low art and stuff. Like, to me, it's either good or bad. You know, and I mean, even a porno film can be art, you know, like the whole point is it's all how something's done. You know, it's the way I think it's the approach, it's the aesthetics, and it's what went into it. That's why it's great. Like, Bill and I just completely connected on like that. And also with Trista, I felt the same way. You know, it's that connection in of the darkness, and of what other people call more weird, but in a way that's more a judgment of others on the outside, because to us that's more our norm.
Mm-hmm. I completely understand. Excellent answer. Trista, do you have a question?
I do. Yeah. I mean, I don't know how to follow that. I could listen to you talk for a really long time, Mark, but you know that I love listening to you talk. So my question, I guess, is, I know that the film was very personal and inspired by tragedy and time. I'm also wondering what kind of research is required to write a script like that. Sorry about my internet connection. I hope you can hear me.
Yeah. We mostly did a lot of research, so a lot of medical papers, a lot of also internet stories, but more detailed internet stories, like larger articles, so we could get like statistics, sort of get a firm grip on a lot of the strategies that the opioid industry, the pharmaceutical industry uses. So watched a few documentaries, read some papers from the American Medical Journal, you know, that kind of stuff, like fairly detailed. Some of it was very dry, but very, very helpful. And because the important thing in this was that, you know, it was to at least try to understand the motivations for the pharma industry, you know, obviously motivated money being their main motivation, but to understand then the methods that they employed to do that, but also how some of the methods also kind of disenfranchise good doctors. like, for example, before the shooting started, I was going to a coffee shop not too far away from where I was staying, near Tom's house. And at one point I kept talking to a guy. The guy was a manager of the coffee shop, really nice guy. And one day he said to me, well, you're clearly not from around here. And he said to me, what are you doing around here? And I said, making a film. And he said, oh, a film, what's it about? Anyway, I said it was an opioid themed film. I told him a little bit about it. And he said to me, you know, sort of very calmly, but at the same time, there was a bit of pain in his eyes. He said to me, I was a doctor. And I said, oh, were you involved with with this side of the business? Like, you mean opioids? He goes, no. He goes, I wouldn't prescribe opioids and I lost my business. So he said, that's why I own a coffee shop now. He goes, I went to another business. He goes, because I lost 90% of my patients because it got to a point where all people were coming in, all they were doing was asking me, can you please write a prescription? And he'd say to them eventually, I can't just write you prescriptions just because you ask. You've got to be exhibiting symptoms. And their attitude was, fine, we'll go to someone else. So he essentially lost his livelihood as a GP because he wouldn't write opioid prescriptions. So that in itself, I thought, was one of the best pieces of research, because it was a real case of how, you know, the honest doctors who didn't see, you know, the opioids as an incredible opportunity to get rich. A lot of them lost their livelihood, which was, you know, pretty terrifying.
So was Tom on hands a lot when you're editing the film, since it's so personal to him?
Not for the editing in terms of like the first cutting of it, but, you know, I work with an editor, Chris Roth. Chris Roth has worked with him on several movies. Chris is a great guy. He's edited a lot of movies, even movies like, he even did Killer Clowns from Outer Space. That's one of his earlier movies, and Crying Freeman, and he's does a lot of work. So Chris and I would work on the different cuts, but Tom would be looking at the cuts. You know, and I'd say, you know, what do you think? He'd give notes sometimes, and, you know, just to make sure that, you know, it was kind of like true to, you know, how he envisioned certain things. But I mean, he didn't have a lot of notes or changes. I mean, because, you know, he and I had already written the script, and the cut is fairly close to the script. Not a lot changed. I mean, we didn't shoot a lot of fat on this film. I mean, sometimes, you know, you end up shooting a film where, like, even Stress to Kill, we shot the original cut of Stress to Kill was something like 135 minutes. And we cut it down to like something like 96 minutes. So you go, gee, what happened to the 39 minutes there? You know, like, it means we had a lot of scenes that we shot that actually didn't make it. And on this one, there were almost no scenes that didn't make it, which is probably also that we probably did a better job of pre-editing the script and maybe being a little tighter with our script, because it's not really a good thing to spend time and effort on scenes that aren't going to make it. And especially because often the reason why you're going to cut something is because you go, well, it's redundant. You know, we already make this point in this, and this scene here. So why do we need this? At the time, though, sometimes you may not have a full grasp of, you might think, well, it's there for another reason. But the interesting thing about cutting, it's not just about, you know, one scene. It's about what comes before and what comes after. And often you'll find that the order of scenes or the way scenes play against each other suddenly negates a scene you might have had there. You think this is really important, but then you may decide, you know, something, we don't even need that scene anymore because those previous three scenes have made the point that we're making more explicitly in the fourth scene. So you cut it out. But yeah, Tom was definitely involved in the note process, in the comment process, but it was pretty much me over Zoom working with Chris, doing most of the main cutting, which after that then went to Australia for the 4K conform and the CGI and the color grade.
What did Tom think of the finished movie?
Yeah, I think he said that he cried when he watched it, you know, for the first time. And especially also when his son's picture came up at the end of the movie. His son, Jordan, is the first thing that you see when we basically fade to black and fade up as the credits roll. Yeah, he was pretty emotional. He was very emotional. And I think he was emotional for quite a number of screenings, and actually still is. He still shows it to different people even now. And, I know he has very difficult days still, where it's like almost unbearable. And obviously, that kind of grief is not something that it never leaves you. You have to somehow work out a way to, accommodate it, accommodate a loss like that into your life. But, obviously clearly the pain remains.
And Bill, what did you think of the finished movie?
Well, I didn't watch it until we started doing our interviews because I don't like to watch myself when I'm in this movie a lot. But I did manage to watch it. And I was similarly moved when Jordan's picture came up on the screen. I liked the movie. I thought it was very effective. And I think it was a wise idea for Tom and Mark not to put that dedication to Tom's son at the beginning, because that would have provided a lens through which you see everything. But it was kind of a gut punch at the end to have watched the whole thing and maybe enjoyed the vigilante, to have lived vicariously through him. Yeah, I'd like to kill some people, and had a little fun with it and got the message. And then to get the end and to see that young man's face and to realize, oh, that's where this came from. I thought it was very subtle and a very good placement. Mm-hmm. And I've had multiple people that I've done interviews with say that they didn't know the story behind the film.
Yeah, I didn't know either.
Until they saw the dedication and it hit them in the same way.
Mm-hmm. Did COVID affect shooting the movie and how it was released?
It didn't affect shooting it because we actually shot in the January just before. Like we're pre-producing in the January, and then into the February we were shooting the movie. So it finished just before COVID was announced. Just before like lockdowns announced. So it didn't affect the shoot. It impacted the post somewhat, but not much because, post is a fairly solitary process. So when you're doing it, like it's me, getting the drives and the footage to the editor. And it's either I'm sitting with the editor after they do a cut and then making changes and making notes and making adjustments. But we're able to basically move to Zoom. So I was sometimes spending hours and hours with the editor just over Zoom. He's where he was up in Burbank, and I was here down in in Laguna just doing the cutting. And so it didn't really impact it. And the same with the sound. Like once we had the lock cut from that, the lock cut then went to Sweden for the music, for Glenn to do the music, and then went to our sound, the sound company, Quinn at Enhanced Media. They then did that. So both of them took about 8 weeks to work on, respectively the sound and the music. At the same time, my guy in Australia then did all the conform. And the only thing that took a long time was initially I sent like the drives to Australia, and they still hadn't even gotten there in 7 weeks. I was like, oh my God, what's going on? So I then sent them there in a different way, like with a courier, with a different type of courier. So that was a bit of a concern. I mean, we had copies of the movie. It's not like we had the film, like 4 copies of it, but yeah, that didn't really impact it. So in a sense, we're able to do it mostly through that lockdown. But it would have been impossible to do any additional shooting, which we didn't do. We didn't do any pickups or anything like that.
Trista, you have another question?
Yes, we've touched on how we all have darker, more eccentric, artistic tastes, but delirium specifically, you guys specialize in.
Oh, sorry, Trista, you broke
you cut
up
off there. I didn't know if everyone
there. I
heard.
didn't quite hear your full question.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys. I've not had this problem before. Thanks for bearing with me.
No problem.
Mark, can you talk a little bit more about delirium and what you guys specialize in and what you have coming up?
Oh yeah. Okay. So like Tom and I do the delirium was to kind of like do stories. Yeah, I mean certainly do stories that kind of mutually interested us. The first one being Stress to Kill. Then, of course, Purgatory Road, which I believe you've heard of that film. Then also we also had, yes, then of course Painkiller. Yeah, look, I would just say if there's anything maybe that it may be doing a little bit different is that the stories are mostly about probably like slightly older characters, not so much, teenage oriented kind of like thrillers and horror films. It's more maybe a little bit like kind of older characters and, more representative perhaps of Tom, more representative to some extent of Tom and I. But yeah, I mean, it's mostly dealing with, I think mostly dealing with themes, I guess, in a way that we often debate, like the first one was us getting pissed off about things like, texting in movies and general rudeness. And then with Purgatory Road, it was about our debates about, religion, the whole idea of faith, what it is, and people who sometimes, misrepresent themselves, how religion can also be, used to misrepresent, as well as for some people, it's also very positive. So I think we have a lot of debate, a lot of philosophical discussion. So I think often the movies kind of reflect the philosophical discussions that we had. We're working on a new one at the moment called Home Wreckers, and Home Wreckers is kind of like about the, in a way like the idea that, well, you've got something, so I should be allowed to have that too. It's kind of like dealing with that kind of mentality of, that whole thing of, and which our society in a way is very split at the moment, and kind of very split economically. So that's kind of what the film's dealing with. But so, yeah, I mean, Home Wreckers is probably going to be the next one that we will do together. And then we definitely would like to do a sequel to Painkiller as well, and extend out the storyline of Bill and Tom, because without giving it away, there is a suggestion near the end of the movie that Bill and Tom will continue on. And then outside that, yeah, I mean, I also like on other things. I'm also working on something with another producer at the moment, Mark Lester and Jeff Miller, a film I'm shooting in a month, almost, I think it's exactly a month from now. I'm shooting that in New York called Bring Him Back Dead. That's the next one that I'm doing. And then I've got quite a few things on at the moment. Don't want to jinx it too much by saying, and also I still want to keep developing a few other stories, even one I had mentioned at you at some point, Trista, a vampire story. So I'd love to keep follow that up once all the restrictions on shooting and all that have fallen by the wayside.
Good. And Bill, what do you have coming up?
I'm going to Romania to play Adolf Hitler.
Really?
In a film which is called The Message. And it's a joint Romanian-United States production. It's about the complicity of the occupied Romanian government and how much they felt they had to cooperate with the Nazis. And so actually they contacted me about another role, and I read the script and I just decided to be bold. And I went back to him and I said, I could do the other role, but I've done that a lot. What I'm really interested in is Hitler. And so we started talking and did some look tests, and I was surprised they attached me as Hitler. So I'm into that now. And I'm going down to Mexico to do a movie called Dead Iris, which is about the Mexican sweat lodge culture and the ancient belief, which goes back to the Aztecs, that in the sweat lodge, you can, through mysticism, contact dead people, that it can be a portal between the two worlds. And it's made by a young director named Adrian Corona, with whom I did an art house film I dearly love called Dis, which is extreme, offensive, non-linear, and you either love it or hate it. It's my kind of movie. So I'm sure Dead Iris will be the same. And I love working in Mexico, and I love working in Eastern Europe. So 2 movies coming up in places that I really, really like to work, and I respect the crew and the people in both of these places.
Very cool. I'm looking forward to both of those. So Painkiller, it's out now. Everywhere you get movies, pretty much, you can get it. And we didn't talk too much about vigilantes, but I always like this kind of story where as an audience member, you question yourself if is it right to root for someone who's doing something like this. So I hope people check it out, Painkiller. And thank you guys for doing the show. All right. Well, thanks, guys. And we'll talk to you all soon.
Thank you.
Thank you
for having us.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.